Okay. Hi. I can't hear you.
Hmm.
I can hear you now. Okay.
All right, cool.
Okay. So to start off, what's your name?
My name is Percival Smith.
Okay. And what are your pronouns?
I use neutral pronouns.
Okay. And then what's your what's your occupation? That
I
sounds too
am a
weird.
college residential advisor.
Okay. And then where is your hometown?
My hometown is Grand Prairie, Texas.
Okay. And also, where were you born?
I was born in Amiens, France.
Okay. Sorry, those are just some of the required questions.
That's fine.
Okay. Oh, and one of the required questions was family. I don't know what she meant
What
by
does that
that,
mean?
but
Yes, I have a family.
okay. So let's start off with something easy. Um, okay, how does your hometown compare to Norman?
It's a lot bigger. Maybe not population wise. I don't know. It's a lot newer, so there's a lot more to do. There's a lot more lights. It's really bright.
Okay. And then sorry, this is so awkward.
It's okay. You can do it, babe.
Okay. So what are your thoughts and feelings of race? And like how do you define your race?
It's a very vague question.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
sorry.
Thoughts and feelings. What does that even mean?
Okay,
Uh, hmm.
how about we start with, like how do you describe your like your race or your ethnicity?
I prefer using just black because I'm not overtly fond of the term African American.
Okay. Can I ask why?
Um, it's weird, I guess is the polite way to put it. Is not, I understand the positive purpose of it, because there is very much difference between black and white Americans, but the fact that only non-white people get the added American tag is a bit of an issue for me, especially since there are so many more white people around the world who are very different than American whites. Um, it's a little bit dehumanizing in that sense, but nobody in modern times who uses the term means it that way, which is why I describe it as weird. It's not problematic. Maybe origin wise, it might be. I don't know. It's not really worth me digging into, but it's just weird. Like as a kid, I didn't really understand why I couldn't just be called American because I was American. Um, but yeah, not really comfy with
Okay.
it.
Um, oh, what's the funniest thing that has happened to you about your race in your lifetime? Like, do you have any funny memories relating to it?
I guess I don't really think about it that way. I guess your roommate freshman year asking me, God, what did she ask me? It was something really, she was asking me why Black people don't have dads. And it just kind of winded me because of how random it was. It was like, please. That was like problematic, but it was still funny because of how absurd it was, I guess. I can't really think of any other moments that are like race related. outside of like blatant stereotyping that were funny memories. So yeah, there's that one.
When was this?
This was like when she moved in. It
Uh,
was when we were having that conversation about like conservatism and guns. It was weird.
I wanted to get out of the room very fast, didn't I?
Yeah,
Okay, I think I remember this. I'm so sorry.
it's fine.
I'm so sorry.
I, I mean, you come to expect it. When I went to Europe for a choir composition, everybody was like taking pictures of me and trying to touch me. And so you kind of get used to things like that when you're surrounded by people who have never seen a Black person before. Oh, yeah.
I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. I'm
I
so
think you did. You didn't, you weren't doing me dirty. It was
okay.
funny. I responded quickly.
Okay.
So it was okay. You didn't leave me hanging, babe.
Okay. I don't remember this. I feel so bad.
It's fine.
I mean, this does sound like Makayla though.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's okay. It wasn't your fault. I think the door was like open and you might have been down the hall. I don't know. Or you might have been in the bathroom. Hmm.
Okay. When you said I was gonna get uncomfortable, I didn't expect it to be this fast.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Your bed looks nice.
Thanks. I made it just for the interview.
Well done.
Okay. Um, I'm so sorry. Okay. Um, okay. Besides that experience you just mentioned, do you have any more memorable experiences growing up like that?
None funny.
It doesn't have to be funny.
Oh, I have a lot. But how many am I willing to put on the internet?
Oh,
Hmm. Some lighter ones. I'm trying to think of ones that like aren't concerning. Let's just go with no.
okay. Let's see. So in I don't like that question. Um, I'm gonna do so bad. I'm horrible at interviews. Okay,
It's okay.
sorry. Um, let's move on to gender for a minute.
All
Okay.
right.
How do you define your gender?
Uh, define is a strong word. I exist in a body that is only sometimes really mine, I guess you could say. It's mine, but I don't really claim it. Um, I typically go with non-binary because it's the easiest way to explain it. It's the closest label. Um, yeah, I present in a very feminine form, but mostly due to lack of sense of style. Um, so yeah,
Okay. What's your earliest memory of gender?
how do you mean?
Like, when were you like first aware of it? Like, in like,
Uh, as a kid, I have pretty conservative parents, so pretty early on, um, probably like you know how little kids like to play games and they like to split into teams for those games. And usually, one of the first ways that people think of splitting into teams is like girls versus boys. That is probably when. I would think.
Okay. And then what's your first memory of like you figuring out that well you're non-binary?
Figuring out is also a strong word. When I trace it, no, it's not your fault. I'm saying that there was a very large gap between when it started, and I can look back now and figure out where it started, and where I finally decided to deal with it or acknowledge it. Like it started around fourth, fifth grade, uh, where I was really into art, and in art, there are these things called personas, which are like art versions that you project onto really, really hard. So it's like this fictional version of you. And a lot of times, what happens is that persona will take on either all of the traits that you hate about yourself or all of the traits that you like about yourself. And around that period of time in my dreams, I started sort of developing two of those. And one of them represented like all of the things I didn't like about myself. And um, they were cursed to where they were basically immortal. They couldn't die, nobody could kill them. But they didn't want to live. They wanted to die, but they couldn't. And then there was a second one, which was everything that I wanted to be. And the one that I hated was a girl, and the one that I liked was a guy. And I think there was a time in like seventh grade where I really sat down and I was like, something about this means something, but I'm not going to address it. And then I didn't end up really addressing it until like sophomore year of high school, where one of my friends was like, "Hey, have you considered the fact that you might be trans?" I was like, "No, but I guess I should." And that's where I like realized, I guess you could say.
Okay. Do you have any funny stories about being non-binary?
uh Not really. Just a lot of like reasons that I should have caught on to and then just didn't. They went over my head, but they're not really funny. They're actually kind of sad. So no.
Oh, um, do you have any hobbies? And is there
Oh,
anything that prevents you from doing them?
uh, I really like any kind of fiber arts, so crocheting, knitting, all forms of crafting. And what are you referring to when you say, is there anything preventing? Are you saying like racism or or just in general
In
anything
general is
preventing?
fine.
Um, Not really. There are things that I would like to turn into hobbies, and the thing that's preventing me from like enjoying them are just availability and access to them. But other than that, no, not really.
Um, okay. Well, what's the hardest thing to talk about regarding race or gender if you wanted either one?
To who?
Um, I don't know.
Because for different kinds of people, it's different. It's easier to talk to somebody who shares your experiences than it is to somebody who doesn't. But even among the people who doesn't, there are like tiers, because they may have similar experiences. They're just fundamentally different, and then some people just don't get it. So I think the hardest people to talk to are probably the people who only want to talk to make themselves feel like they are not part of the problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because they're not really willing to listen to you, and then you get, tokenism. You just kind of become this, I'm not X because of my Y friend, and that's really annoying because you don't want to talk to them about it. But I don't know. Or my parents. Yeah, probably my parents.
About gender, right? Or does it go to
About
race?
both, because we don't really have those kinds of conversations in my household. And whenever I tell them something that happened to me that's like sad, they kind of flip out about it. Like not at me. It's more like they start playing the I'm a failure of a parent game. How could I let this happen to you? That sort of stuff. And it's just a lot to deal with, and I don't really like dealing with it.
Um, let's see. Growing up, did you have did you have friends of different races, like of a different race?
Yeah, I was raised in a predominantly white city, so yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I went out of order and now I'm confused about which questions I asked and didn't.
It's okay. If you ask one that you already have, I'll let you know.
Okay. Okay. How do you define your sexuality?
Open, I guess. I am pansexual, but I am pansexual from more of a philosophical place, I guess you could say. Um, uh, I figured this one out before I figured out gender. It doesn't really, because I'm attracted to everyone, I don't really understand the concept of limiting your attraction. I don't know. I guess that's how I kind of saw it because I grew up in a really conservative house. And so I grew up under the narrative that like you choose who you're attracted to. But that didn't really make sense to me. So I kind of mentally modified it to you don't choose who you're attracted to, but you choose who you like hook up with, and you choose your sexuality in the sense that like if I'm attracted to someone of the same sex, I can just choose to not date them. It's still wrong, but like it was a weird way to think, and so I really sat on that. I was like, but why would you like limit your spaces? Why would you limit the amount of people that you're into? It shouldn't really matter that much. And then I was like, oh, I only feel this way because I like everybody. So so yeah, I'm pan.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to word this question. Um,
It's fine.
do you feel like you have any power in society, or do you feel like you have some limitations on it?
I think I know what you mean for this question, so I'm going to try and answer that based off of that. Yes and no in some spaces. For example, white women are really drawn to like motherly Black women, and most of the world sees me as a Black woman, so I'm going to use that as like my defining term. And so usually when I'm taking positions of like caregiving, um, I've noticed that I do kind of get that leg up. But in most cases, no, I feel like any leadership position I get or any like power position I get has to be earned through a lot of grit, um, especially if it involves anything social. I make a lot of social faux pas because I don't really understand most social constructs, and like concepts and like the way people socialize. I just wasn't socialized very well. And again, Asperger's autism makes it a little difficult. to socialize at times. And so I came off as mean as a kid, really, really easily, partially because I was the scary Black kid, but also because I didn't really understand what was rude and what wasn't. And so it was like a mix of both, and it was a double hammer. And so in that setting, I definitely had to work really, really hard to like get to anywhere near the top. Nowadays, I know how to charm my way, I guess you could say, into not being seen that way, but it's still kind of difficult, especially in like a university where a lot of people didn't really grow up in like non-homogenous areas. So I do kind of get treated differently. I definitely notice it a lot with my parents, more so than me, because I have always had this extra little special skill in the sense that I excel at almost every like concept that I voluntarily put myself in or involve myself with. And so I earn people's respect that way almost automatically. Um, but with my parents, I've noticed that my mother hit the glass ceiling really quickly, and I've noticed that her glass ceiling is lower than a lot of white women's glass ceiling. And it's to the point where right now she's at the like highest point that any Black woman has ever reached within her company. Um, and it's still nowhere near the top. It's kind of ridiculous the effort they go to include her, without promoting her, even though they clearly feel that she deserves to be promoted, but they don't want to hurt white people's feelings by promoting her over them. It's kind of ridiculous, but yeah. Does that work?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, have you noticed people treating you different being Black in an RA, like having power over the residents?
As an RA, no, because I'm not usually involved in like conflict related situations. So I don't really, I guess you could say, get the opportunity to be presented with that level of hostility. Um, and if I have, I just haven't noticed it because it hasn't been like awful, you know. My residents don't really care, but it is a little weird being the only person, one of the only three people on your floor who look like you, when there's 60 of you. You know, and there are racist residents, they just don't encounter me.
Okay. In your lifetime, have you noticed any significant changes in race relations?
Yes, I guess you could say. How do I phrase this? Misogyny has gotten so bad that a lot of white women are waking up to racism, I guess you could say. And as more white women are being included in a lot of other white spaces, they're kind of realizing, how big of a deal racism is. And so, like, you know, the whole women in STEM movements and stuff like that, has brought a lot of good conversations, I would say, up, um, because, you know, it's pretty much guaranteed that if you enter a space where there's like a woman in STEM, and she's like one of the only few, she'll talk about it. And then they kind of don't realize that a very similar concept applies to race, just on a larger scale. You know, like being the only woman in your class sucks, but like being the only Black person in your entire department is a completely different thing. Um, and then, you know, with obviously the whole BLM stuff, that's come up a lot. But I don't know. I feel like I have a very skewed experience with like positive racial relations because I went to um, a school from 6th to 12th grade that was very open about discussions and things like that. And so we talked about those things a lot. And so everybody was kind of on the same page from a very early point. There wasn't like the normal racism and stuff that you face or that you like see within a school because everybody was talking about it and everybody was confronting it. So yeah, it's a little different in the real world, but
Okay. How um how do you believe the like do you think the media does a good job of covering racial topics?
who are you calling the media? Are you
Um
saying like
I guess let's start off with
any
like the news.
the news? Uh, no. I don't think the news does a very good job of covering like anything related to race because there is always an agenda that is not created by non-white people, if that makes sense. It's always somebody else's take on an issue that concerns you, you know? So it's bound to be skewed, but I think definitely now because there's so much racism that's being brought up within the Republican Party. A lot of ill-meaning Democrats have seen it as like a gotcha. Let's expose the racist Republicans, and so it's become a very politicalized topic when it's not. Like, yes, race is inherently political because it is a political construct, but also it's mostly social sometimes, and that matters more, at least in my opinion, because if you change the way you talk about something socially, you can change it politically a lot faster than you can just by changing laws and stuff like that, you know? So no, I don't think the media has done a good job of covering
Okay.
it, especially the BLM stuff.
And then how about like regular TV shows and stuff like that?
Mm.
Do you think they've done any better?
I only really watch stuff that's targeted towards like teens and kids. So I can only really speak on that stuff. I know that like a lot of the adult stuff still has a lot of racist undertones and stuff, but it's played off as like cringe humor or it's funny. It's not that big a deal, which is why I will never watch The Office. But in the sense of kids shows, I think they've been doing a phenomenal job because um, yes, there is an agenda, but the agenda is to normalize other people of different races existing. It's literally just them existing. And it's really nice to see media with like Black people that isn't centered around Black trauma to make white people feel bad. You know what I mean? Because there's so much of that. It's annoying. I just want to see a Black kid kill dragons, you know? Stuff like that. That's all I want. That's what representation is. We don't need a sob story every time. And I think that like cartoons have done a really good job at that, especially since they know that they're marketing towards children. So they don't need this big, heavy narrative about anything. You know, it's just people existing who are different. There's one show specifically like Craig of the Creek, and it's just about a Black family and their kid who's like really imaginative and he likes to be a kid essentially. And it's really cool. Not necessarily because it's about a Black family, but because the family is actually Black, if that makes sense. A lot of times in media, there are characters who are Black, but they're not functionally Black people. They just kind of exist, in my opinion, to appease ACAB Emily, I guess you could say, um, because they're more so caricatures. They're not people. They don't behave in the way that somebody who's raised in a Black family would. You know, there's stereotypes and everything, and there's always going to be someone different, but they very much feel like no Black person had a say in writing them. But in Craig of the Creek, they very much feel Black, and it's really nice to see. It's really comforting. So yeah. Sorry, I rambled a bit.
Oh no, you're fine. Um, okay. Um, this is one of, I think this is another required question. So I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to make it relate to you. Okay. Sorry. Because it's
No,
men
it's
and
okay.
women and okay.
That's fine. Just ask it like that. It's fine.
Okay. How well does your subject, oh, sorry. How well do you believe the media represents men in general compared to like women?
This is also one of the reasons that I don't watch adult TV. I don't like the way that men are represented at all. And it's not from like a men's rights place. It's I don't like how one note how disgustingly like not necessarily negative. It's just it feels like there's a caricature of man, and it is not a good one ever. Very rarely is there a good man on TV because it just kind of they focus on a lot of the negative qualities of men, and yes, there are plenty, but I think that that's not really something that I really want to be watching. You know, like I if I'm watching TV, I want to relax. I don't want to see some incompetent man being like the star of a TV show with his hot wife who's fed up with him. You know, that's like I I I see enough of that at home. You know, I want men who exist um and are people before they are men, if that makes sense. Um, a lot of times media focuses on the men part, but men are people too. I can't believe I'm saying that. And it's always bothered me, so I didn't like watching it. I think in like cartoons and anime and things like that, though, it's a little bit different in the sense that a lot of writers don't know how to write women. Um, and so what ends up happening is that all of the men will have very like homoerotic undertones because the author will only write complex relationships between them, and then they'll have girlfriends, but the women in the show are not as developed, and they don't really feel like people. They feel like archetypes, if anything. And so everybody like feels really drawn to the men as a thing more so than them and as their separate couples. And I think that there's an issue if people think that a fake couple between two people is more believable than an input couple and stuff like that. And so it's yeah, it really Western media is bad at writing men, and then I guess you could say Eastern media is bad at writing women. Um, it's rarely good unless it's like if unless the show focuses on just one over the other. Like I find that shows with a primarily female cast are usually better at writing both genders than shows that aim for a mixed cast. So yeah.
And then do you watch any TV shows with like non-binary people in it?
Uh yeah, I guess yeah, there aren't many. There are some where they're like kind of implied to be, I guess you could say, because usually what happens is whenever a show will insert a non-binary character, it is more often than not going to be a non-human character, um, and they just won't really use binary pronouns for that thing. Um, I don't really watch a lot of those shows because they're usually not really well written to begin with. Um, but like Shira, Princesses of Power, there is a character who's non-binary, and they're quite fun to watch. So yes, but no.
Okay. I think, oh, um, Have you felt that other people judge you by your social class? Like being
Like
middle class?
socioeconomic
Yeah.
class? Yes, but not in the expected way. Um, how do I phrase this? Um, how do I phrase this? Judge in the sense that make assumptions based off of, yes. Judge in the sense that people think that I am a lesser person. No, my family is lower upper class, and we don't really live the lifestyle of someone you would expect, based off of like my parents, our household income. Um, and so it kind of throws people off sometimes. Um, my friends growing up, like elementary school, used to think that we were rich because of like the toilet paper brand we buy. Um, we stopped buying it. I don't even remember what it used to be. But it was like weird for me as a kid. I didn't really like to acknowledge it because I had friends who like were whose parents were struggling to get by, and so I felt like I couldn't really talk on a lot of class-based issues, and I didn't really like talking about money as a kid because of that, because I thought that people were going to think that I was a spoiled brat, and they did, regardless of me talking about it or not. Um, but that was also very much contrasted by the fact that I did not have a sense of style as a kid. Like I don't now. I have a bit more of one, but it's still not really existent. But as a kid, I didn't have one because my parents wouldn't let me wear the clothes that I wanted to wear. So I didn't like anything that I wore. So I didn't put in an effort to make myself look good. And so I kind of dressed like a bum. And, kids talk to their parents, and sometimes parents get concerned. And so when I was in middle school, sometimes people would call my parents and ask if things were okay at home, money wise, because they thought that we were poor and I couldn't afford nice clothes. They were wrong, but like that, I would say that counts for this question. Stuff like that. So yeah, like not in the expected way, but I have been judged
Yeah.
for it. And then people kind of get mad at me, like not necessarily mad at me. I've learned that they're not mad at me. They're more so mad at their own circumstances when I tell them what our household income is, because it's kind of unfair that some people can make so much while others can make so little, but they're still putting in the same amount of work.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that was my last question.
Coolio.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Call me if you need anything.
Okay.